Perfect. Good evening and welcome. The first thing we do is check the volume for the speakers on the back to see if people in the back row can hear us and behind the walls there. And then we wait for the clang of the library doors, which are in renovation mode and will soon be glass doors. I don't know what will happen at that point. And then I call this meeting to order. And for Wednesday, November 15th, 2017, at 7 p.m., we have an slightly amended agenda that includes an addition under 8.1, in which the report was amended to include a written submission that had coming out of the second public hearing, just so we all know that. And that was accidentally left out of an earlier report. And before I move for an adoption of that agenda, I want to say this evening is historic, not because of the large crowd, but I think it's next to the very last public meeting that Connie Jordison will be at. So we want to welcome her for her last 20 years, thank her for all that time. Connie, in a lot of ways, has been the voice of the District of Sechelt. I know when she was first hired, she answered all of my emails under my name. And it went from there. She's always spoken and been the communications officer and manager behind what the District of Sechelt says officially and sometimes unofficially. I said next to final public meeting because on Friday afternoon at 2:30 to 3:30 or 4, there is a public reception in this room for anyone who'd like to come by, and anyone who's watching on YouTube, who watches YouTube, thanks to the work that Connie has been doing, they should also come out too and say goodbye and thank her for her work. Yeah. Okay. I don't think we're going to live stream the Friday afternoon meeting, so you can relax and do what you want there. Motion to adopt the agenda is amended. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Mueller, thank you very much. All those in favor? That's carried. And we move to the first appointment, item 3.1, which is appointments, delegation, and we have the Chair and President of the Sunshine Coast Community Forest, Glenn Bonderud, with the third quarter results for 2017. Welcome, Mr. President.
Mr. Mayor. Well, I notice you have 380 pages to go through tonight, so I will try and be brief. I think you've all read the report. It's the September 30th, and we have finished the harvesting for this year, and it was close to 30,000 cubic meters as we had thought, a little more than Dave estimated, but it worked out very well. The $117 average sales value was something that was a bit of a surprise. We had thought originally that there was going to be a break even at the best, and maybe a loss, but the markets cooperated, the species mix was good, and we were able to recover more than we thought out of the forest. So we're happy with that, and we were just really pleasantly surprised. My second paragraph there, I guess I dealt with the vandalism we've had at Wormy Lake, not Williams Lake. It was a surprise. I mean, a lot of people did a lot of good work to build up that recreational area, and I know it's out of the way, but when people go and actually take away the posts and then take a shotgun to the signs and then put a swastika up on it, that is absolutely unacceptable. And credit to the Capilano Highways, they've agreed to replace the signs at their cost as a bit of a community service. So we, as you probably saw in the paper, put out a reward. There have been some inquiries, but we'll leave it for the police to decide. Yeah. September, we had the Wood Expo again. That was our third year, and over 1,300 people. And it was just an amazing, I mean, if you've never been there, to see the crafts that people can do with wood. I mean, there was tractors, functional little tractors that were toys, but not toys. You wouldn't want to give them to a kid to run across the carpets, but they're just amazing. And I think the other thing that happened is we opened up the firewood permits in mid-September. And to quote Dave, at one point, they were flying out the door. 140 people came in, and I think we had, what was it, 140 permits, right, in about 2-3 week period. So a lot of people are going to be looking to heat their homes, and that's up in the burn area that we'll be using. And the last quarter here is basically it's been planning engineering. We have got the cut block permits for 2 in Wilson and 1 in Half Moon Bay. The bid packages are now out with the contractors, and I think it'll be another couple of weeks we get those back. So we'll see what happens there. And that is basically what we have. And if you look at the financials, I mean, their cash position is very good. I know, Noel, you asked me last time about the dividend. And I'll give you the same answer. I'll wait till after the audited statements to actually have the board sit down and discuss what the dividend would be. But all things being equal, and if we can work through the winter, well, we know it'll be a good dividend. So we'll leave it at that point. I don't want to promise and then have to pull back on that one. But,
It's a pretty nice variance in the retained earnings. So
yeah, very nice.
We all, our eyes jumped to that. So,
I figured you would.
so good work to Mr.
You know,
Market.
It's one of those things that, you know, timber markets, you're always at the whim. It's one of those markets that's 100% competitive. You know, you can do all the control you want on costs and planning and doing things and timing, but ultimately until you sell the product, you're not sure what you're going to get. And through my career, I've had surprises both ways, and it's always nice to be a plus. I want to talk a little bit about the directors themselves. I know it's been something that we've got 9 directors, and directorships are unpaid volunteers, and we do get a fair amount of harassment, as sometimes you do as well, and that also makes people very upset. I don't know what we can do about it, but I think we were last night at a meeting down at Roberts Creek, and it was actually a very good meeting. We had a good, respectful discussion, a lot of questions about process, a lot of questions about how we work and how we work with the band, the various approval processes we go through. And I think we maybe helped people's confidence that we are actually doing a reasonable due diligence in how we work. I think there was quite a surprise that we actually have rules, regulations, and laws that we have to deal with in terms of how we do things. So it was, I think, a very good meeting that we had. So that's there. Part 3, community interface. I think that was one of the things that, you know, sometimes, you know, we don't blow our horn enough. We don't take ads out in the paper and say, here's what we did. I think that's something that, you know, probably maybe we should do more of, but we haven't. But I'm gonna look through the list, what we've done. We work with the Coast Woodcrafters Guild and their Christmas programs in terms of their North Pole system where the kids get the presents and everything. We've got the Sunshine Coast Trail Society. We've worked with them for many years. We started with them 4 years ago with their strategic study, which they did, and they had the people from Whistler come down and talk about the value of the tourism and the trails that they have up there. So we've worked with them. We helped them with the new Frogger Trail in 2015, and this year the Wormy Lake Recreational Site. So that was one of the reasons why we got pretty upset about the vandalism up there. 2015, we did the Sechelt Arts Festival. We contributed to that. We also that year contributed to the Canada Day show of the logger sports. I don't know if anybody knew that. Salmonid Enhancement Program. We do a yearly program there of support for that. Firewood permits. Over the years, there's been 375 people, and it's been 850 permits that have gone out for firewood collection. So a lot of homes are getting our wood for heat. And Linda, of course, has done the Wood Expo for 3 years. The first year we had 500 people through. Second year, we had 900, and in September, we had 1,300 people through, so that has grown as well. And beyond that, we work with the local people, West Coast Log Homes, when we can. They can come in, we have a cut block, and pick the logs they want for their house. You know, we go to extra lengths to help them. We have the pole program, which is not something that's local, but it goes, and everybody needs a telephone pole somewhere. So that is one of the things we do. Frogs, we have a couple of frog ponds we have developed now. And we've worked with the beekeepers as well. And it was excellent honey, we've got that as well. The Hidden Grove, the Sechelt Grove Society, some of that area is in our tenure, and yet we've worked with them very well with the trails, and we've been very happy to do that. And that's all outside of any of the dividends we've given you in terms of our thing. And I think that's another thing that I'd like to show is when you first put the community forest together, not only did you put the capital in, Sechelt contributed the working capital, which was $450,000. That was repaid. You've had 9 years out of 10 dividends of the 25,000, so there's a couple hundred and $230,000. And then the extraordinary dividends we've given you in the last 5 years have been $1.5 million. So in total, about $2.2 million we've returned. And that is something that I don't think people quite grasp. I mean, it's not something you have in your fingertips all the time, but I wanted to just say that the money that is coming through is coming back to the community. And if you look at it, our revenue is about $2 million a year, and over $1 million of that are wages and for the people here. So most of that money stays in the community. And if you look at the 25-year tenure, at $2 million a year, that'll be $50 million. So I just wanted to put that in perspective. Other than that, I think most of that there, and there's been a lot of emails going back and forth right now, and on East Wilson. Currently this year it's the elk being used as a reason not to do the logging. And I think all of you have seen our annual report from last year. Tom Pinfold did a very good study on the elk. The original 20-odd translocated elk are now probably about 1,600 in total. 450 have been translocated to other areas, Upper Fraser Valley and then up through Toba Inlet. And there's a fair number that have been hunted as well. So the elk are doing really well, and part of the ministry's blue list they have, they hope by 2025 to take it off the blue list. And it's not endangered, which is a separate list. The blue list is sort of species of special interest, but once they reach a certain population, they're off the blue list. So they're hoping by 2025 or before, it'll be off the blue list. So they're the biggest rabbits I've ever seen. They're just multiplying. And a part of that, I guess, is that the climate here, the topology of the land, it's a low snow area, so they have no problems that way. The open area gives them a fairly good browse. And there's no predators really, with the odd cougar and wolf, but that's about it. So there we have that, and I think you have the list of all the organizations that have received Legacy Fund money, so I won't repeat all that. And any questions?
Thank you very much for the report, and I'm sure there are some questions of council, and I know I have one or two myself, so I'll look and see Councillor Mueller.
Thanks again for your presentation, Mr. Bonderud. I think my question, what I wanted to ask you is, I know that last year when we went through the board appointment process, there was an issue there that we discussed about basically trying to find members that were interested in sitting on the board, and that was an issue. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, and as you may know, that the past couple of years at our provincial meetings that we go to, UBCM and the other, there's a lot of instances where forestry is discussed. I've been in a lot of those types of meetings, and I've really been thinking hard about that as to how that could be remedied. And I'm just curious, I know that this has been raised, if there's any plans of the board to go through perhaps a type of community visioning which might bring other types of community members out.
Well, you've got a letter coming to you, I think this week, you'll be in terms of outlining the process and what we look at. There is a skills matrix that we like to look at. And I'll say that we don't seem to have, and part of the problem is being volunteer. Younger people who are working find it very hard to volunteer. And I think that's a problem up and down the coast. We'd like to do that. In terms of visioning, I'd have to say, where do you want to go with that? I mean, that's a discussion I think we'd have to see.
Oh, I don't think I had a strong answer just to where I wanted to go. I think the idea was behind that type of an exercise was to really get what the community's feeling, if there's been any changes since the community forests have been working, and just refresh the
I think we're trying to do a bit of an outreach right now, and last night down in Roberts Creek, we certainly did that. And I think, talking to the groups and all the people that have come through the office, and there's been, I would say with the permits and some of the other contractors and that, people who are interested, we've got a fair number. I mean, Dave is out there visiting groups anyway. Nobody has come to us and has said, here's what we want you to do other than not log.
Just to follow up on that, though, Glenn, you'll recall there was a meeting in the summer with, in your offices with the corporate officer, the new CAO to introduce Andrew, myself with Ms. Harris, yourself, and I think the vice chair, vice president, where we explicitly talked about the potential for a public engagement or outreach where in fact the community would have a chance after 10 years to think through publicly the role of the community forest and show their support in some way, and or not, or what tweaking might be necessary. And at the time it seemed that Tim Penfold had suggested it could be tied in to your 5-year plan that's about to come through. So I'm not sure if that's in your letter or not, but is there anything you can say about follow-up from that meeting that we had in the summer?
Well, the 5-year plan is approaching completion. It's not quite there yet. I mean, it's going back and forth, and the engineers, the mapping process and everything else. So there have been some changes in regulations that Dave is wrestling with. So I think we're hoping the next month or two that'll be finished, and then we can see we'll go for the spring maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any other thoughts from council and comments on the report? The money earned or the money lost? Or
just to follow up on what you just said there, Mr. Bonderud. So the 5-year plan then is almost complete?
Almost. I think there's been a few wrinkles there, and Dave just wants to make sure that, some of the changes, he wants to be doubly sure. He's checking with other people, and he's checking with the people who do the mapping just to make sure everything's right.
Okay, and then that would go forward to the provincial government and...
Well, no, it has to go through public review first.
Right.
And that's a certain thing that has to be done. And then when that is done, then it is submitted. And it has to go through the band and then through the ministry. And they can have questions back and forth as well. So it's not here's the plan, we're finished with it. It's a very back and forth public process.
Right, so just to be clear then, in the spring, when that draft of that plan comes forward, that's when you would envision the community outreach?
Somewhere in the new year. Let's not say spring. It could be sooner, it could be later. Not later, I don't think, but you never know.
Okay. So that's a process with the plan that goes, as you say, the public reviews it, Sechelt Nation, province, back and forth, and it's a extended period of time.
It's not what you would call a slam dunk. You don't present it and say, okay, there it is. Yeah.
Can I switch topics a little bit? As you mentioned in your report, there's bids out right now for 3 cuts, one in Half Moon Bay, 2 in West Sechelt. I've received, I think I asked this afternoon, and there was 94 emails, and I've received some since. So let's say we've hit 100 as of midnight tonight, and there's a lot of concern. Most of them are form letters. Some of them are not. Some of them are very thoughtful and responsive. And I know some of the names. I don't know many others, but 100 emails coming through to follow through on that. So I'm wondering if you can say anything about how that will unfold. And one of the things I'd heard, and I didn't know if it was from you or from the media or from one of these many emails I read, was the potential that if there are 3 cut blocks tendered, that of course you don't do them all at once. You do 1, 2, and then 3. Any sense of the timing or ordering, or is that something you do later?
Well, the bids are out now, the bid packages, let's say, and then we've got another week or so before the bids come in. And Dave's plan was to do 2, one in East Wilson, one in Half Moon Bay. EW 28, which is the one we're thinking we want to do, and then the one in Half Moon Bay, and go from there. I would say that we'll have to take a look at the bids, see what the costs are, and go from there. Dave's preference is to do the Chanterelle now, obviously. When we talked about it at the meeting last night, he told the Roberts Creek Community Association that what we were thinking, so they know that now. So.
Okay, I'm not sure if knowledge is, knowledge is what it is.
Yep.
So, okay, we know that now in terms of the priorities, and that's important for us to recognize. As you know, working with this new council since 2014, it's been a learning process and some give and take and some smooth sailing and some not so smooth sailing. It's this council or members of this council have often thought there's room for more community in the community forest, but we also have a lot of confidence in the work that the board is doing and the work that the community forest has actually done. So we're kind of trying to hold that balance there as we do. But what we do have confidence in is that all of those rules and regulations and requirements that you mentioned will be followed, and I'm sure they will be. And then in that mix of planning, there'll be room for community values as you understand them and as we hear them through the community. And then if there is work that has to be done in sensitive parts of the forest, that it's done in ways which reflects the best interests of all, which includes, of course, the board and the board's decision acting on behalf of the district of Sechelt and the community that we represent as well. So it's a complex balance, and I just want to urge you to know that we're all watching it carefully and hoping to support whatever happens.
Well, I have to say that the board has total confidence in Dave. I mean, he knows the rules and regulations backwards, forwards, and he's lectured at BCIT and UBC, and he was just there last week or this past few days. So we have absolutely no qualms about that at all. And community engagement, as we said, the door is always open. I was the one who canceled the advisory committee because of, actions that were taken and abuse that was given to the volunteers there. So, and I said, if you got a problem, come and see us through the door. So.
Okay, is there anything else from council? It's been really helpful. Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to raise some issues, and thank you for bringing the report with all its results. I appreciate it very much.
Well, you got another 377 pages to go.
Yes, it's a long night.
Thank you.
And the first 2 items are both mostly good. And the next item is actually a proclamation, which I'm pleased to make. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Hans, you're interrupting the meeting, but we have an agenda. We have an agenda. If you'd like to raise questions of the council, of the business that we do tonight, you can do that at the end of our meeting, and that's addressed to us about the business that we do. Okay? Not of the community forest, no, or the representatives of the community forest. They're reporting to us tonight, and we can report to you, but not a direct exchange. It's not that kind of a meeting. At the end of the meeting, any of the business that we've conducted, and there's a number of people that are here waiting for items that they're coming up for, and they'll want to ask us questions about what we've done. We'll be happy to address those and explain any of the business we've conducted. So the proclamation this evening, and I'm very pleased to be able to make it, and there is some material attached, but I understand there's more material coming from members of the Métis Nation, and I'm going to give the President of the Métis Nation an opportunity to speak for a moment or two when I've done the proclamation. Whereas the Métis people are recognized as one of Canada's Aboriginal peoples pursuant to Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, and whereas the Métis culture, rich in spiritual beliefs and colorful traditions, is an integral part of British Columbia's multicultural character, and whereas throughout history, Métis citizens have made significant contributions to the development and success of our province, and whereas British Columbia recognized Louis Riel Day, November 16, 1993, as a national Métis holiday in commemoration of the 108th anniversary of the death of Louis Riel, an historic leader of the Canadian Métis people. Now, therefore, I, Bruce Milne, do hereby proclaim that November 16th, 2017, shall be known as Métis Day in the District of Sechelt. I'd also like to mention that tomorrow at noon, there will be a flag raising here at the community hall, the municipal hall, library, whatever we call it, outside here. And there'll be a number of people and some school children present, so anyone who would like to join us for that, please do. And just briefly, if you want to press the button in front of it, it's done now. Oh, wrong way. Ron, if you could just, there, okay.
Tahawi Tilikum, welcome friends. My greeting to you is in Chinook jargon or Chinook Wawa, the traditional Michif language of the Pacific Northwest. And I'd like to at this time recognize the Sechelt Indian band on whose land this council meeting is being held. I just want to explain that last year when we were here, the organization was the Vancouver Métis Citizen Society. Since that time, because of the New Societies Act, the society was transmitted under the New Societies Act, and subsequently it changed its name to the United Canadian Métis Nation. And that is who we are representing tonight. Now, I just want to mention that after you present this to Ron, I would like to give each member of the council further information on the work of the new Métis Nation here. I'm going to be giving you some articles that my husband and I have written on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People.
Thank you very much for that. And by way of introduction, that's Mrs. Terry Goulet and George Goulet. They're noted, esteemed historians of in Canada. And just George is going to say a word, and then Ron Paradis. We'll let George. Both
I'll let you speak in a sec.
Okay.
It's a hard act to follow. Terry Goulet, like you said, she's one of our historians, and George. I have to say this to this council and to the Sechelt Nation, and I'm very proud to be living here on the Sunshine Coast as the president of the United Canadian Métis Nation. We have a lot of Métis living on the Sunshine Coast, and more and more people are joining us on a regular basis. But what I really am grateful for, and it comes from the heart when we speak to the council and all the people here in Sechelt, is the flag raising. It's very emotional for us because it's a sign of recognition. And this community here that I live in has raised the flag several times. With that said, there's just one more thing that happens every Saturday. There's jigging lessons that doesn't cost anything at Davis Bay Hall. 10 till 1 o'clock. So if anybody wants to come there, it's open to the public. You don't have to be Métis. I don't jig myself, but I sure get to see the smiles. With that said, I'd like to give George. Oh, does it move?
Thank you, and some of us live close enough, we might be able to go to jigging.
This is our annual meeting before the council, and we're really happy that you entertained our applications again tonight. We wanted to say that since we spoke to you last year, there's been an historic Métis flag raising, and that was on Parliamentary Hill grounds in Ottawa. For the very first time, the federal government raised the Métis flag there. That is very interesting because it was the federal government of the day that dug up an ancient, fusty, musty, dusty 534-year-old statute under which to hang the great Métis leader Louis Riel. So it's come full circle in that period of time. Now, I wanted to say that there's a movement afoot to exonerate Louis Riel, which is quite different from pardon. Pardon is to forgive someone for a crime committed. Exonerate is to say that they were never guilty in the first place. Now, we wrote a book, my wife and I, The Trial of Louis Riel, Justice and Mercy Denied. It's about 300 pages with numerous independent archival sources establishing the trial was rife with injustices, unfairness, and illegality at the highest levels from the Prime Minister down. And so we are just passing that information on to you because there are a number of petitions going across Canada now to exonerate Riel. And we thank you again for agreeing to raise the Métis flag and for the proclamation which has been issued here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad we beat Ottawa by 2 years, being progressive on the Sunshine Coast. And we'll just take a moment before we move on to the agenda. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Thanks. And we'll see you tomorrow. Okay, moving directly into the business of the meeting tonight, we have first the adoption of the minutes from previous council meetings. And the first is a very quick adoption of the minutes of the 3 p.m. regular council meeting of November 1st, 2017. Motion to receive and adopt. Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Wright. All those in favor? That's carried. And moving on to item 5.2, which is again a very quick adoption of the minutes of the 3 p.m. special council meeting of November 8th. Councillor Wright, Councillor Shanks. All those in favor? That's carried. And of somewhat more substance, the minutes of the 7 p.m. regular council meeting of November 1st. A motion to receive and adopt. Councillor Seegers, thank you. Councillor Shanks. Are there any errors or additions in those minutes? Sure, people were reading the 380 pages in the public hearing and probably not looking at the minutes of 2 weeks ago, but if you did see any errors or omissions, seeing none, all those in favor of adoption? That's carried. Thank you very much for that. And we're at item 8, the main event. Now we actually have 8.1A, which is an amended report from the municipal planner. And that's in this thick package. So first, a motion to receive the report prepared by the municipal planner dated November 2nd, 2017 regarding the second public hearing of zoning bylaw number 25, 1987, amendment bylaw number 25274, 2016 brackets RTC Properties Limited bracket for the properties located at 5845 and 5851 Sunshine Coast Highway be received. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Wright, and all those in favor? And we'll then turn to our development services planner, Ms. Lettman, and who will introduce her report.
Mayor and Council, I'm going to give a short presentation tonight to summarize some of the recommendations that you have in front of you.
Okay, there's a lot of talk in the fifth row back. If you can just give us a chance to continue, thanks a lot.
Well, the first slide here is a map of the neighborhood boundaries. There seemed to be some question about where the subject property was. You can see the green star here that indicates it's within the Sechelt Village neighborhood. The three properties are located here at the corner of Sunshine Coast Highway and Shorncliffe Avenue. At the start of Snicket Park is in this area here. To give you some background, the current zoning is R1 Residential 1 that has a minimum lot size of 500 meters squared. The current official community plan designation is special infill area number 2, and it's not residential, which would support single-family residential. The proposed zoning is CD 39, which is a new zone that this bylaw amendment proposes to create. The development proposal has been revised since the previous public hearing. CD 39, a comprehensive development zone, allows a mixed form multifamily development consisting of a maximum of 31 dwelling units in buildings ranging from 7.5 meters to 13.5 meters. The official community plan designation, as you can see here, oops, sorry, wrong slide, is in special infill area number 2, which along with special infill number 3 has some specific policies within the district of Sechelt. Again, it's a special infill area and not the yellow, which would be supportive of what the current zoning is in terms of single family residential. This is just an expert, like a zoom in showing the infill areas. You can see here that number 2 compromises several properties, as well as the number 3 up here has quite a few properties in it too. The special policies are these areas have potential for infill or redevelopment to intensive residential, ground-oriented multifamily and or small-scale tourist commercial uses such as a restaurant or small inn boutique hotel. Development will likely be incremental and must respect and be compatible with the scale of surrounding uses. The heights will generally be in the form of 2 to 3 stories. Typical block-like apartment structures are not supported. The range of permitted uses, building massing, density, and heights are to be established through the rezoning process and application of development permit area design guidelines. Waterfront park walkway dedications will be required as a condition of any new development. 6.21 has the excerpt. It says, these areas are waterfront residential areas with potential for increased residential density and or tourist commercial or specialized commercial uses in the long term. Before considering development applications for these areas, more detailed analysis and discussion with area residents is required to establish a framework for appropriate uses, building forms, heights, and densities. Any development in this area will be expected to provide a high standard of design, scale appropriate to the neighborhood setting, improved public access walkways along the waterfront, and a high standard of environmental protection and rehabilitation of the shoreline. Now I'd like to speak to recommendation number 3, which you have before you on page 27 of the agenda. And there were some concerns about the different types of language. So in A, the differentiate between extension and expansion when there really is no difference. So what we're trying to do is clarify that by changing the word extension to expansion area in the regulation, in the section 4.2b of the bylaw in that area. So it's more consistent with the use of the term on the map schedule as well as another area of the bylaw. So number B is removing the words for building from the section. That was an oversight on staff when they were revising the bylaw. That got the intent, somehow got left that word for building in there. So removing it, then the bylaw states that the intent of CD 39 is to facilitate the development of a mixed form multifamily residential development. The zoning bylaw summary, it creates the new zone, the Comprehensive Development Zone 39. It adds a new definition for building width and rezones the 3 properties to a mix of a new CD 39 zone and a PA1 park, recreation, and assembly zone. This is the bylaw schedule that talks about the areas that are going to be rezoned to CD 39 here and the parks area here. The CD 39 zone summary, its principal use is multifamily dwelling. It's my understanding that the developer proposes that most of these will be ground oriented, therefore having an entrance at the ground. Accessory use is customarily incidental and subordinate to the above. The minimum lot area is 8,000 square meters, which is virtually the size of the lot now. The maximum lot coverage is 40%. The base density is 20 residential units. The maximum density is 31 residential units, subject to density bonus with provision of community amenities. So this is the CD 39 map that shows the different subzones that we'll be talking about in a moment. And we can go back to that. I did want to talk about the lot coverage. This is the definition of lot coverage from zoning bylaw 25. It means the percentage of total horizontal area of a lot that may be built upon, including accessory buildings and other structures, carports, covered patios, verandas, and decks over 0.6 meters in height, that's approximately 2 feet, and excluding eaves to a maximum of 0.6 meters, 2 feet, open courtyards, patios, driveways, and parking stalls. There was some question about what that definition is, but this is the definition of lot coverage from zoning bylaw 25. CD 39, again, moving on, the building setbacks from the north line are 5 meters, that's what's proposed. And that's to the highway. To the east lot line, Shorncliffe Avenue, 4.5 meters. From the south lot line, which would be the Snicket Park extension, 1 meter. From the west lot line, 3 meters. From another building, so any other building on the site, 3 meters. And from the ocean's natural boundary, 15 meters minimum. The parking is the number of spaces to meet the zoning bylaw requirements, plus 0.2 parking spaces per unit for visitors. So that's in it. They'll be exceeding the parking that is required, is what this is proposing. 10% of the allowable small parking spaces would be allowed, and at least 1 accessible parking space per building. Maximum building heights, 13.5 meters. Subzone B and D, 10.5 meters, and the subzone C, which is the central portion of the lot, 7.5 meters. For comparison's sake, the R1 single-family residential allows a building height of 10.5 meters to the peak. These heights, because they're not single-family dwellings, are measured to the midpoint of the roof. Oh, sorry, just missed that one about the maximum building width in subzone A is 45 meters. The community amenity contributions to reach the maximum 31 units are construction of Shorncliffe Avenue to full width along the property frontage, improvements to Snicket Park extension, including bollard lighting, paved pathway, seating area, and native landscaping, and that 50% of the dwelling units are constructed adaptable or accessible. Construction of the Camden Road Beach Access Trail, the dedication of a minimum of 1,597 square meters for the Snicket Park extension, and either enter into a housing agreement for the provision of 2 units of affordable housing on the site, or provide cash in lieu contribution of $412,000 to the Affordable Housing Operating Reserve. This is a summary of bylaw changes. So the density, and we're comparing here the original CD 39 that was shown at the first public hearing versus the amended CD 39 illustrated that was part of the second public hearing. So in the first application, that was 45 units base density to 48 units maximum. It's dropped down to 20 units max density to 31 units. And that's a significant decrease in density. The building height previously was 7.5 meters to 21.5 meters. That's dropped to 7.5 meters to 13.5 meters. The maximum building width was unlimited in the previous proposal. In this condition, we are considering 4.5 meters, 45 meters as the maximum building width, which in the area along the highway would be the length of the building, which will result in at least 2 buildings along the highway section, because that section between the 2 setback areas is exactly 90 meters. So there will be some area there. The minimum building setbacks in the previous were 6 meters. They have moved to 4.5 meters along the east lot line. To the north lot line, from 6 meters to a reduction of 5 meters. To the south lot line, 1 meter to the south lot line is unchanged, as is the west lot line is unchanged, and to any other building is unchanged at 3 meters. The previous application showed 1 unit of affordable housing contribution, and this one contains 2. The following, I wanted to review the current conditions of final adoption. They're in the report. They are an update to the geotechnical assessment conducted by Western Geotechnical Consultants for the final site layout. A tree protection plan to be completed and implemented. A development permit application that receives council's support in principle. That's where you will see the detailed design drawings will be coming forward as before final adoption of this bylaw. A traffic impact study to be completed. It is completed. The cultural and recreational facility community amenity is satisfactory to council, and what is proposed is the expansion of Snicket Park. F, the applicant enter into a servicing agreement for any required on-site and off-site works as identified by engineering staff. And the recommendation 5 tonight talks about including an additional condition, and this is with regards to the traffic impact studies. There was no previous recommendation to include those recommendations coming out of those traffic studies as required improvements. So we have included that here by stating the applicant entering into a servicing agreement for any required on-site and off-site works as identified by engineering staff and the pro rata share of the recommended roadworks improvements identified in the final traffic impact study prepared by R.F. Binney and Associates dated March 29th, and that's to deal with West Sechelt, but also has an area on Shorncliffe. And the RTC Wharf Avenue and Cowrie Street development's final traffic impact study prepared by R.F. Binney and Associates dated September 1st, 2017. And that's the end of my presentation, Mayor and Council. If you have any questions, thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Yes, there will be some comments and questions, I'm sure. Who would like to start? Councillor Mueller?
Yes, thank you. I had a question about the Snicket Park expansion. And specifically, it was raised in the public hearing in terms of, and my question is, what is required and what is optional? We've heard that waterfront expansion of some type is required. Do we have
So it was put in as a part of the density bonusing framework, but is also part of their conditions of final adoption in terms of, let me just read it here, that cultural recreation facility community amenity is satisfactory to council. So it's both considered as a community amenity, but is also a mandatory part of this final adoption of this bylaw, that is secured.
in a way it does. But.
Did you want the specifics of what it was?
I think that's okay.
And Councillor Shanks?
Yeah, just two questions. What other amenities are being given aside from the park? That's one question. And second question is the $412,000 to the affordable housing reserve, if you want to look at it that way, is that contingent on 1 unit or 2 units? Or is that priced for 2 units, or the total of 1 unit, or the total of 2 units?
I'll answer the last one because that's the easiest one. It's for 2 units. It's the equivalent, the 412,000 is 206,000 per unit. And that's coming out of our official community plan policies on affordable housing. In terms of the density of the community amenities, if they go to the maximum density, which the applicant has stated they wish to do, again, that's the construction of Shorncliffe to the full width road basically from Snicket Park to Shorncliffe. They would only, under normal circumstances, have to do half road improvements. So that's the full. And then the improvements to Snicket Park are the accessible 2-meter wide trail with a smooth and hard surface, installation of the bollard lighting along the trail, and I'm reading from page 278, the actual bylaw. Removal of invasive plant species, landscaping with native species, construction of a public gathering space with benches and garbage recycling facilities. That 50% of the dwelling units constructed on the property be built to accessible or adaptable standards. that the construction of the Camden Road beach access trail from Highway 101 to the waterfront is constructed to the satisfaction of the Sechelt Parks Department. And again, either a housing agreement to provide the 2 units of affordable housing or a cash in lieu contribution. And all of these things, as well as the dedication of the park, need to be secured prior to final adoption.
The Camden Road dedication would be basically a path standard, not a half road width with curb and gutter and so.
No, it's to be a beach access, typical of our trail type beach access to the ocean.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shanks, and Councillor Lutz.
At what point would the tree protection plan be done, and who would do that?
So there's already been a survey on the site with the tree survey, and that will be coming forward as soon as they've decided about where the exact buildings are, which can be retained. That will be done, I believe, I'm not positive, but it may be by staff, the review in the bylaw for that, but that will be coming forward. And there is an opportunity to save a lot of trees. So that's, again, prior to final adoption.
Okay. Last couple of days at work and she's watching the wrong YouTube videos. So, you know, what can you do? At least they're not on screen. Okay, Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. In the bylaw, it indicates 40% lot coverage. And at the public hearing, public hearing that we had, the developer indicated that his understanding was that the proposed developed area includes parking spaces. And I'm reading that from page 37. And those who were in attendance heard him say that. And yet, in our zoning bylaw, it indicates that parking stalls are not included as part of lot coverage. So, given that the bylaw would allow him to actually have the parking stalls not be included in lot coverage, how could we as council ensure that those are actually taken into account so that 60% of the property has not developed on?
Thank you. Go ahead.
One solution would be to look at Article 3 of the zoning bylaw, 39.043, that talks about lot coverage is 40%. There's also a notwithstanding subsection that unenclosed balconies and extended roof overhangs attached to buildings may occupy up to 10% of additional lot area. We could add a clause 3.3 that notwithstanding that subsection, lot coverage may not include parking stalls if that's the wish of council.
Okay, and that would be in the zoning, in the bylaw we'd be passing tonight then?
I would suggest that would be the easiest way to do that.
Okay, the other piece around that, when we're looking at the 40% coverage, do we include the area that's going to be dedicated to Snicket Park or not?
No, we do not.
So it's just on the other, okay. Then I have another question. The original plan that was brought forward by the developer indicated there would be 4 buildings on the lot. We don't have anything before us right now indicating how many buildings will be coming, although we have 4 separate zones with different heights. So I'm assuming that at least 4 buildings, potentially 5. If along the highway, it needs to be 2 buildings.
That's correct. It needs to be 2 buildings along the highway. So I suspect it will be at least 5 buildings.
All right, and in the initial proposal, there were 6 units in each of the 3 buildings along the waterfront. So it would be 18 units there. If we're looking at a total of 31, in the 2 apartment buildings that would be along the highway, we would end up with 13 apartments. So if we have 2 buildings, 13 apartments, we'd have 6 or 7 apartments in each building. And yet we're looking at a height of 13.5 meters, which would indicate potentially 4 stories.
Or they could be townhomes.
Or they could be townhomes.
Could be linear.
I may add one comment. I believe it's the intent of the developer because of the proximity to the ocean and the substrata that's rock in that area, that they do not want to go with underground parking, which be also cost prohibitive. So they're looking at parking at the grade level under the townhomes.
Okay, so that would give us 3 stories if they were 2-story townhouses, which could still be accommodated in a 10.5 meter height. Is that correct?
If I could comment, Mr. Mayor, members of council, just quickly, that there haven't been specific designs yet to this zoning bylaw. The intent of the zoning is to look at massing and height, lot coverage, so that the development permit is a condition of final adoption of this bylaw. You will be seeing detailed design drawings coming forward that match the zoning bylaw in terms of before final adoption. So you will be, the requirement is that there's acceptance in principle by council of the development permit for form and character prior to adoption.
Yes, I understand that. And if we, at this table now, indicate we would go with 13.5 meters, then we know that what comes back to us will be 13.5 meters. So if we do not want the development to come back at 13.5 meters, then we need to make a modification here so that the developer actually comes back with something that we can actually live with and the community can live with. Okay, I think that's all my questions at this point. Thank you.
If I follow that last exchange, let's be clear that at zoning, we're looking at height in various places, and that would be 13.5 meters close to the highway and 10.5 closer to the water in those massings. So one thing I had on height, you said because it's not residential, the height is measured at midpoint of the roof. And could you help me with that one? Is that, if it's a peaked roof, like where's mid-peak? I understand where midpoint of the roof is if it's a flat roof. Not quite so clear if it's angled or has dormers or.
So in the case of a multifaceted roof where they had multiple peaks, we would try to take the overall area of each of those and find the midpoint and then put them together to find the actual average. Right. So it's the average of the roofs.
So depending on the steepness of the roof design and the architectural work, it could in fact be more than 13.5 meters in some areas.
The maximum, yes.
Yes, the actual visual height could be different than the maximum average if it's midpoint on peaks. I'm just asking that because traditionally councils have wanted peaked roofs for character, and recalling an issue in my neighborhood where the only way to get it within the roof lines or the maximum was to flatten that. So we want to keep that in mind. If we're coming back to form and character, that the design that may have more of a residential feel, i.e. peaked roofs, may have a different height. Okay. Any other questions from councillors? I had one for process, just in terms of what we're looking at here today. So on page 288 of our agenda package, we have the core bylaw for tonight with the new provisions and wording. But the rest of the bylaw, which we passed once and then rescinded, is in page 278 of the agenda package. And I'm a little confused about the fact that we rescinded the reading, then we brought it forward. So what we're looking at today for second reading, if it should go forward after the public hearing, is everything we find in the page 274 and attachments, et cetera, and all those attachments attached. And so everything in attachment 6 to the public hearing, plus the 8.1B on page 288. I just want to make sure all of the conditions, et cetera, because I couldn't find them all and follow them all in terms of what we were doing here. So for, in particular, the conditions for adoption, I want to make sure they're all where they should be. And while we're sorting that out, so I know that, so everything we have to pass tonight is on page 288 through to page 294. Is that where we're at? Okay, good. That's this package here. One further question following on Councillor Shanks on the housing, affordable housing. I suspect that's a bylaw that isn't revised very often. It sounded to me like our DCCs. When was the last time we set the rates that were appropriate for affordable housing?
It's been a few years. It should be updated. I believe it was last about 2010.
Okay, it's certainly not fair to do it in the midst of this, but I think it's something that should come back to council for anything subsequent and future. If you can find an affordable house in the district of Sechelt for $412,000, I think the last one was sold on Whitaker just a week or so ago, and it was a little under 400. So it's something to think about quite seriously in terms of keeping our bylaws up to date. In the same way the DCCs, they'd be almost 20 years before they were adopted, and costs and affordability and prices change. So I'd like to see that as one of the issues that we keep in mind for updating our bylaws. And Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. In the density part of your presentation, you discussed the base density for the CD 39, and then the add-ons that would be the result of community amenity contribution. So if council decided not to pursue the density bonus through community amenities, where would that leave this application?
You would, if we remove those maximum density of community amenities, it would take us to a base density, a CD zone that would just have the basics, I guess, in it. And you would be down to 20 units on the property. Which
would be built to the specs of the bylaw from lot line to lot line. For example, Snicket Park is one of the community amenities.
Well, yes, except for my previous question was about that, about which parts of those are voluntary and which ones are considered community amenities.
It's my understanding that cultural and the part that it's still in the council requirements that be secured because of it's been negotiated with the developer, and they're prepared to dedicate that.
So I think,
but is it connected to density or not?
It is
it's
both.
Under 4. It's under 4.
But it's also a condition listed as a condition of final adoption that be secured. In terms of the condition, if you look on page 28, E, the cultural recreation facility community amenity is satisfactory to council, which means the proposed expansion of Snicket Park. The OCP as well talks about that it is a requirement of any waterfront development that there be waterfront access provided to the public in a linear form. Okay. That may also be an approving officer condition.
Right, and so if I had to extrapolate from that, it could be dedicated as a bare piece of land where we would be in charge of the improvements, but based on that article of adoption, this would then go back and that would all get sorted out before next public hearing, because obviously that would change this application to a point that we would require for the public hearing.
Well, that's a good question.
We had a bylaw before us. I guess if there are changes in the density and the use would remain the same, but the density, you're going backwards. You don't actually have to have a public hearing when you're reducing the density on a property, is my understanding. Sorry. When you're reducing if council decides to reduce the density, to remove the maximum density, they do not, I believe, need a public hearing because the density is not being increased. The density is being reduced. So there's no requirement for a third public hearing.
I would suggest we would want to acknowledge the approval of the developer
Microphone? Just to give a nice explanation so we can all hear that, and it's for those watching as well.
Thank you, Your Worship, for the reminder. That's correct. Reducing the density wouldn't require a public hearing, reducing it from what the bylaw is already. My only comment is we would, of course, want confirmation that the developer is willing to reduce the density before council proceeded with that, before we amended a bylaw or proceeded with that.
Okay, I think there's still some items regarding that to be sorted out as to what aspects of the Snicket Part extension would be voluntary and which parts would not be.
I think you summarized it earlier that, and I heard the response there, that as a bare land transfer, a park requirement or a waterfront requirement would be required whether there was any density provisions or not. Any development on that property will require some level, but the degree to which and the size would all have to be negotiated.
Okay, if I may offer a few comments. I know nothing's been moved, nothing's on the table, but I just wanted to summarize what we've seen so far. For me, this has been one of the most difficult applications. We've seen larger applications, we've seen higher applications, but due to the community response, you might say, this one's been very difficult to weigh. I do respect private property, and I do respect the rights of private property owners. This has a number of issues to unpack. I think there's issues of height, there's issues of density. This was often compared to the watermark in the public hearings. I don't think that's a fair comparison. This is not an apartment block building. A fair comparison would be to Wakefield Beach. This is a multifamily, potentially. It's near the water, and it has a lot of that characteristics of that particular neighborhood. For myself, the height as it's been reduced, that to me is acceptable, it's workable. 13.5 meters is not something that I would hang on. The issue to me is the density. Every single respondent in the public hearings recognized that this property ought to be redeveloped. There were questions around the numbers of units and what would fit with that particular neighborhood, ranging from 3 all the way up to the maximum, which was a part of a previous application that has since been rescinded. For myself, in a situation like this where we have the community responding in the ways that it has, this is not for me the type of situation where council should be pursuing density bonuses and pursuing the community amenities with regards to density bonuses. The base density is something that I'm comfortable with. I think it's something that middle of the road Sechelt understands and why we would do that. The other important part for me about this application is some of the key things about the development permit coming before final adoption and the tree protection plan. I think that if we deal with that in that way, it can be something that's acceptable both to the neighbors and to Sechelt at large. Thank you.
Thank you. So if you want, I want to get back to the process, but if you can think of how you would incorporate your suggestions into what would amount to an amendment to the amendment, we'll deal with that in just a moment. So first, can I have the second recommendation that the second public hearing minutes dated October 5th, 2017 be received? Thank you, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Mueller. All those in favor? That's good. Now, we have 2 amendments recommended by staff, which are in item 3, the zoning bylaw number 25, 1987, be amended by A, changing the word extension to expansion area in section 4.2B of general regulations in Schedule B, and B, removing the words for buildings from the section intent in Schedule B, so that is not limited, the number of buildings is not limited to 4. So could I have somebody move those 2 staff recommendations? Thank you, Councillor Wright and Councillor Seegers. All those in favor of those 2? Now, I'd look to council for a moment to see if there is any further amendments being suggested or considered before we get to item 4, which is so Councillor Seegers, I recognize you first.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to address Councillor Mueller's comment about the density. One of the things that we are struggling with is affordable housing on the Sunshine Coast. in order to allow for affordable housing, we have to allow for more density. That's the only way that we can keep the properties in the range that people can actually live there. So while I agree with you that I would like to see less density, I think our neighborhoods would like to see that, we need to allow for additional density to be able to have the developer make a reasonable amount of money and have the properties at a price that people can afford to live in. So I'm willing to make that trade-off so that we have more units. So that's the first comment. The other, you want me to go into the amendments I'd like to see?
I'm looking to exactly for that. If there's any councillors who would like other amendments before we get to the actual reading of the bylaw, we should do that now, so we're not doing it after the fact.
Okay, let me get to the right page then.
And we can, a number of us may want to respond to. Having lived in some of the most expensive cities in the world, I yet to find any connection between density and affordability.
Okay, on page 291 is the bylaw that we'll be looking at, or the schedule.
Yes.
Under lot coverage 3, I'd like to add a 3.3. And I'm not sure of the wording here, but it's around parking stalls. So that parking stalls are to be included in lot coverage rather than being excluded as per our zoning bylaw.
I wonder if we could do that in 3.1. The maximum lot coverage is 40%, inclusive of all parking, notwithstanding zoning bylaw number 25.
Right, but the parking stalls are mentioned specifically in zoning bylaw 25. So I don't know how we deal with that. Yeah, right on. So
we're here.
Yes.
So that is 40.
Yes.
And then mention zoning 25 in this amendment. Is that what you want?
Okay, so in the zoning bylaw, lot coverage excludes parking stalls. As per zoning
page is
bylaw,
that?
it's actually from our zoning bylaw, I printed it out, brought it.
That's right.
Right, and that's what Angela
in the master
had
zoning
about.
bylaw.
Yes, that's right. So unless we specifically indicate that parking stalls are to be included in lot coverage, they will be excluded.
Yeah, so the
And I don't
amendment
know
I
how
think
to
you're
do that.
looking for is 3.1. The maximum lot coverage is 40%, inclusive of all parking stalls, notwithstanding any requirements under zoning bylaw number 25.
If staff is okay with that wording, I'm okay with that as
I
well.
just want to, we'll check between the corporate officer and Angela, development services planner,
Municipal planner.
municipal planner. Oh, wrong tags in front of us today.
I believe that would work. The maximum lot coverage is 40%, inclusive of all parking stalls, notwithstanding zoning bylaws 25.
Requirements under zoning
Yeah,
bylaw.
okay.
Or any stipulation of zoning bylaw, stipulation or requirements. Do we know the intent of what Councillor Seeger's amendment would be? Anyone to second it? I see 2 seconders, but I will take Councillor Mueller's. Just on that amendment, the intent is to include building and parking in the total lot coverage of 40%, which is 3% more than what was mentioned in the public hearing. Is there any discussion of that amendment? Councillor Wright. Sorry, you went on.
Your Worship, I don't want to speak to the
That
amendment.
one? Okay.
Okay, but I do want to speak before you vote on
We'll
the
come back.
amendment.
I'm not sure if I can follow that. Any discussion of the amendment? Then it's your turn.
I'd
Councillor
like to
Wright.
make a referral motion, Your Worship. I'd like to refer this back to the administration. They've heard our concerns about the height. They've heard our concerns about the density. And every time we start to make amendments to a report and the recommendations on the fly like this, we end up in deep trouble. We need to send it back to the administration and let them rework it and bring it back. At the very most, it's going to postpone it, 2 weeks? And then we can have a look at it and they can come back.
Okay.
I'm
Now,
not,
I'm letting you speak way more than we should on a motion to refer.
Thank you.
There is a motion to refer, so let's do that. The question I have, though, and council can address this. if it's to be referred back to staff, is it simply that amendment, or are there other considerations and amendments? Because we may as well get them all on the table so that they can we only want to refer it once. Only once, not every 2 weeks. So I just want to then look to council. That we have an amendment. We'll vote on whether to refer it to staff or deal with it all tonight. If we vote to refer it, I will ask for council to accumulate all of their concerns in writing, in comments, so that staff only has to work it once. But I can't do that in advance. At the moment, we have an amendment and a motion to refer, which actually includes the entire bylaw. No, not being seconded. Somebody to second the motion to refer? Councillor Shanks. All those in favor of the motion to refer this item back to staff and delay it for 2 weeks? On process or procedure? Not on the, okay, on process.
If we refer this right now at this stage, can we change the amendments without it having to be referred again? I'm concerned that if we want to include density, that should go before the vote.
No, after the vote. And what I will do there is that once we know it's being referred, I will ask for council resolutions on any other considerations and amendments they would like to see incorporated. And then they can all be put in one place.
Okay.
Every council meeting's a real surprise. I'm glad I read my Robert's Rules of Order. This is newer than I expected. So, but what we can do that. But first we look at this motion to refer, and then if it's on its way back to staff, I will ask, and we can do that through council resolution. Corporate officer more or less agree with me?
Yes, my only comment would be that
Microphone.
actually, thank you for asking, Your Worship, because procedurally, under Robert's rules, it's a deferral motion that
Yes.
that trumps the motion on the floor, and that there is no more discussion. Referral to staff or committee or what have you is a little different. So I would like to actually confirm that actually it's deferral that I think is what we have here. Sounding with the intent that I'm understanding.
Doesn't deferral need a timeline to come? We want to know when it comes back.
Yeah, it doesn't have to, but it's always better so that everybody understands that. But the most important part is the not able to discuss. You had a motion on the
Yes.
floor to make amendments. The deferral motion trumps it, and
That's
then
right.
no further discussion.
Okay, and that's where we're at now.
Yes, thank you.
Any other procedural questions?
Can we be clear? Was it a refer or defer?
It's a deferral, which amounts to the same thing in general context and understanding. It will be deferred from council table. It'll land back with staff, who will then deal with the amendments. And then I will ask again for council consideration of resolutions to instruct staff to make sure these other things are caught. I don't want this, I'm surprised actually what's happening so far. I don't want this to fall into some procedural morass where week after week we have to deal with this tonight so people know where we're going. Motion to defer is on the floor, has been discussed in procedural terms, and we did hear some of the reasons for why the councillor who made the motion thought it should happen. All those in favor? Any opposed? I think we'll be dealing, it's a tied vote. So it's defied, so it's defeated. It's defeated. So we're back with an amendment, which means we have a motion on the floor to amend Schedule B, Item 3, 3.1, the maximum lot coverage is 40%, inclusive of all parking, notwithstanding the stipulation or requirements of zoning bylaw number 25. That's clear to people? Any discussion of that item? Yep, Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. I seconded this for discussion. I wanted to see where this would go. I'm thankful for Councillor Wright and his measured confidence in this council and making decisions. That's one of the reasons I think why we have multiple readings of this bylaw. So if there's any of those items that come up, I know that there's more to this than just the issue of parking. There's the roads, there's the sidewalks. Are they permeable or not? There's a number of things to work through. This is not an amendment that I would be prepared to make on the fly. I think that between this reading and the next, our staff can perhaps provide us with a further recommendation on that particular item. I understand the intent of it, and I think that's something we need to work through.
Councillor Seegers, and then I'll make a comment about what I just heard procedurally. I think what I'm hearing and what may work is that we put as many amendments in as we think have second reading on an amended bylaw, and I will not call for third reading tonight.
I'd like some more clarity from Councillor Mueller on what his comment is. I know that we have engineering already indicating that all, stormwater, et cetera, all has to be managed on site. That's one of their conditions. It's already in this application, or actually one of the conditions behind this. So I'm wondering what's the intent of what you're bringing forward and what your objection is to this. I'm just not clear as to what you said. Thanks.
Councillor Mueller?
I think the point of that I was trying to make is that there's more to it than just the location of parking spaces. There's also issues related to egress and ingress to the property, and also to the actual construction of the spaces, whether they're permeable or not. That affects your coverage area. So if we have perhaps the planner would like to speak to that now, but I just want to be clear, and I think we get another shot at between now and then.
So some of this will be different, and on the side of council, it's very seldom that we deal with issues quite as complex as this one. Some of this will be dealt with at the development permit area approval, and that's usually traditionally has not been looked at very carefully by councils, but it's being taken up much more extensively by councils across the province in the last couple of years. So at development permit, architectural issues, permeability, form, character, many of the things that we want to know about how it will actually look and practice in the ground will come back. Now, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have said this, because councils would get a development permit and it would just sort of be a slam dunk after third reading and on the way to adoption. The Vancouver Council showed us only 3 weeks ago that a project fully within the OCP, fully within the zoning bylaw, was turned back at development permit area, and this is the Kiefer Road project. And that was an instructive lesson to all councils across BC that development permit and the architectural work to show that this will work in the community has to be taken seriously. And so, Councillor Mueller, you will get a chance at development permit area development permit approval, to actually have many of those details. Tonight, we're actually supposed to just be looking at the height and massing of zones in the zoning bylaw. And lot coverage is one of those, so that's fair enough. But we want to be careful about where we're focusing and where we're not. So we have an amendment on the floor. Any further discussion of that amendment, which is on clarity on the parking coverage based on comments at the public hearing? Sure. And with your microphone, one more time.
Thank you. Moved and seconded that, first of all, we're looking at page 291 of the bylaw, although it hasn't been read yet, but this is where the amendment would show up under 3.1, and moved and seconded that 3.1 be amended to read that maximum lot coverage is 40% inclusive of all parking stalls, notwithstanding any stipulations under zoning bylaw 25.
I'd like to call the question. All those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed to the amendment? That's carried. And we're back to the space between recommendation 3 and 4. Are there any other amendments to the zoning bylaw number 25274, 2016, before it goes forward? I see Councillor Seegers and Councillor Mueller. I didn't catch who was, microphone was on first. Councillor Seegers. Okay.
Thank you. On page 293, subzone A, building height, I'd like to make propose an amendment to that no building in subzone A shall exceed 10.5 meters in height.
A?
Yes. Subzone A, number 1.1.
Okay, page 293, partway down, subzone A1, building height, no building, and so it's to strike out 13.5 and replace that with 10.5. Is there somebody to second that? Councillor Shanks. Any discussion of that amendment? All those in favor of that amendment? Any opposed? That's defeated. Any other amendments to the bylaw before us? I recognize Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, I'd like to make the motion that we strike out a mention of maximum density and the community amenities.
So let's find out where that would actually be. So under page 292 to over to 291, we would strike out 4.2, notwithstanding section, the number of dwelling units, maybe that'll be eliminated. And then we would look to staff to tell us how that will impact anything that follows 4.2A. Would it in fact strike out all of A, B, C, D, E, and F?
Mayor and Council, I believe that's the intent of the bylaw, is that those items would be removed, save for the requirement for the dedication of the park.
So item 4, under the amendment, just so people are clear, it would read density, 4.1, the number of dwelling units shall not exceed 20 units, end of section. And the amendment would be to delete everything that follows under 4.2 through A through to F. Not under the density provisions. It would show up. So that's the question that Councillor Mueller was trying to clarify earlier. Would section F stay in as a dedication of an area adjacent to the natural boundary of the sea, or would that actually not be a density provision? It would show up at some point as a under the approval or under other requirements.
So Mayor and Council, the requirement for a cultural or recreational facility community amenity satisfactory to Council, and it was proposed that this would be the expansion of Snicket Park, is a requirement of the conditions of final adoption that were stated at the September 9th, 2016 meeting of Council as one of the conditions. So I believe the park dedication will still come forward as part of this rezoning application, and it will be zoned PA1.
What are you reading from?
I'm reading from page 28 under the context and background.
28 of what?
Under
8.1
context.
of item 8.1A on
Okay.
this agenda.
That's what I was trying to clarify, what bylaw we were looking at today and what was carried forward and what wasn't.
Yeah, so under, on page 28 of the agenda, you have a context and background section where it talks about the initial report to committee was August 31st, 2016. And at the September 9th, 2016 regular meeting, Council considered conditions of adoption and gave the bylaw first reading and referred the bylaw to public hearing.
Okay.
The following conditions of final adoption are, and that's the tree protection plan, the further geotechnical assessment, a development permit application that receives council support in principle, the traffic impact study, which has been completed, and the cultural or recreational facility community amenity satisfactory to council.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarity. So with the amendment before us, we would go back to a council resolution of September 9th, and that resolution would take precedence and set the tone for the final adoption. Okay. Any discussion of this amendment?
I'm not sure if there's a secondary.
Oh, is it seconded? No. Okay. Does anyone? It's been seconded by Councillor Lutz. And you'd like to speak to it?
I would.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, as I said in my previous comments, this is one of the most difficult development proposals that we've dealt with, and it's not just because of the reaction of the surrounding residents. That of course, is the front of our mind. We want to create something that's going to work here, and there are very few compromises that can be made. This is one that I think works in many ways, and I think it's something that can be workable. So that's why I put it on the table.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion of that item? Councillor Seegers?
Thank you. I will not be supporting the amendment. I think there are a number of things that we're looking at when we do a development of this size, even with 20 units. We need to have road access set up properly. We have 20 units where these people are going to need to get out to the highway. We have an intersection that will all of a sudden have more traffic. So we are looking at having the developer take that on rather than the rest of the residents of the district of Sechelt. So I will not be supporting this. I'd like to see this go forward with the amenities as proposed by staff.
Okay. We might come back with some of those things dealt with in item 5, which are conditions to be met prior to final adoption. And the approval officer will also be involved in road work and access. Is that correct?
The approving officer can only ask for half road improvements along the frontage,
And
unless there's extended works that are needed to support the development. The traffic impact studies may have some things that will be conditions that may affect how the roads are developed.
and those conditions would be under item 5 for considerations for final adoption.
Correct.
Okay. I think it's an interesting suggestion that we not seek community amenities and go back to base density. So other councillors like to speak to that amendment. Councillor Shanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship. These latest 2 amendments that have been considered and are being considered are closer to my interpretation of the vision document and the OCP interpretation of infill area number 2. So I'll be supporting this. I guess with a subject to, I suppose, these other things being considered at a future date prior to development permit.
Okay. Councillor Wright.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I'm not going to support 20 units, and this is one of the problems, and hence my referral motion or deferral motion, is that I don't know whether 20 units is the right number. Yes, I'd like to see 20 units, but I also know that we need some of these amenities. And now you have to try and find that balance between what you're going to give them in increased density and what you're going to get for amenities. And here we are trying to determine whether it's going to be, we said, no, it's not going to be 31, now it's going to be 20. And if this is defeated, then we're going to try 24 and play around with it until we get a number that the council agrees on. To me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have all of that discussion and start making the judgment calls at the council table. That's why we have an administration. They make recommendations to us. And I'm sorry, for me, it does not make sense what we're doing.
Okay, thank you for that. Council only works at the table and only when we're convened in public. So it's only possible for councillors to bring these things forward under these situations. And what we've heard, just to be clear, is that one councillor feels that the density provisions in 4.2 following are not worth the extra 11 units. And Councillor Wright, I think you just suggested we need those amenities, and Councillor Seegers as well. So is there any further to speak on the amendment to remove the density provisions and the bonus income with it, community amenities that come with it? I see Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted, if I may, to respond to some of the things that have been said. Yeah, it's not perfect. This compromise that I propose is not perfect. But I think I just want to make one thing clear, is that I'm not prepared to support 31 units. And this was something that would allow me potentially to accept that. And I understand that there's a lot of things to weigh. And we've heard from the community, we've heard a large number of concerns, and some of them are actually related to those amenities, the improvements to Camden beach access. That was something that the people living adjacent did not want that. With regards to the traffic issues going in and out of that, I expect that to be handled with servicing. If we're going to be building additional aspects to Shorncliffe Road that are community amenities, that's something extra. That's not something that I would hang this development upon. But the density, I think, has emerged as the #1 issue, and how we're going to deal with that and see a development happen there. That's something that has come up again and again. That property needs to be redeveloped. Right now, it's attracting transient population, and it's currently not good for the surrounding neighborhood. What's going on there now? So that's my compromise, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
And Councillor Lutz hasn't spoken, so if you don't mind, I'll go to her first. I was wondering if she would like to
Thank you.
comment.
I too will support this. I think that a lot of the amenities from A to F will be taken care of in a lot of different ways. I would think that the only one that won't be addressed through this development is the affordable housing cash in lieu, and I'm sorry to see that go. But I think that for the community, we're doing the right thing. 20 units that more than likely will be accessible, all of them, because of the price point these are going to have to be at. I would think it would be in the developer's best interest to do that. We still will have our Shorncliffe Avenue access and Snicket Park. So I'm good with this amendment, and I thank the councillor for bringing it forward.
Councillor Wright.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I want to make it very clear, I don't support 31 units either.
It's processed tonight.
But it's the process that we're using to get there. And it's flawed. I still believe that there's a number in there, because there are some of these community amenities that we do need. And I understand that there's some we don't particularly want and that the community doesn't want. And I'm quite prepared to give those up to get a lower density. But there are some of them, as Councillor Seegers pointed out, that we do need to make sure are there. And that's access into the development and a half-decent corner at that to get out. So I can't support 20 units, but I want to make it clear 31 is not the right number for me either. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much. Having heard from council, and I think fairly extensively, I will call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Oh, okay. The amendment is to delete to go on to page 291 under density, to delete 4.2, notwithstanding subject, etc. The number of dwelling units may be increased to 31, and all that follows, so that the density on this property is the number of dwelling units shall not exceed 20 units. Plain, simple, straightforward. And we had one councillor talk about the vision statement. We've had two talk about amenities we need, others amenities they might give up. All those in favor of the amendment as proposed? And all those opposed? And that's carried. Now, we're moving on to item. Are there any other amendments that councillors would like to suggest? If not, I would like to move on to item 4, which is that the zoning bylaw number 25, 1987 be given second reading as amended. And I'll strike out third reading because I want staff to be able to take it back and bring it to us in a whole that we know exactly as it is. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Lutz, seconded by Councillor Mueller. Any further discussion of the amended bylaw that we now have in front of us for second reading? Councillor Mueller.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to this bylaw. This bylaw is more in line with what I've heard. I am well aware that that 31 units original would have failed, and so at this we get to move forward. We get to continue the process. I know staff is going to have another chance at this when it comes back at third reading. We'll get another look at it, and I do expect that to be a fulsome reading, and I expect that we're going to hear more about this after this meeting.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Seekers?
Thank you. So what we've done is we've left the heights the same.
Yep.
We've reduced the number of units. Yep. Lot coverage is pretty much the same except for parking stalls, which means we could potentially end up with larger, more expensive units.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of bylaw number 25, 1987, amendment bylaw number 25, 274, 2016, as amended for second reading. That's what we're voting on now. Then I'll take it to second reading in a minute. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried as well. We have item 5, that the following be included in the conditions to be met prior to the final adoption of amendment bylaw. This is to add A, B, C, D, E, F. Will it be G or will it says I? I'm wondering about the numbering there. It's on page 27, which is on our report from the municipal planner, and it's adding a condition as of page 28.
Mayor and Council, it would in effect replace F because it reads basically the same. The applicant entering into a servicing agreement for any required on-site and off-site works as identified by engineering staff, and the pro rata share is the part that's being added. Okay. But because of the numbering in 5, I wanted to use the 1 instead of an I.
Yep. So it will replace F, and that pro rata share, of course, will change if the density changes. Just so we know, and the other developers in the area know. Okay. Okay, so item 5, somebody to move recommendation 5. Councillor Lutz, Councillor Mueller, all those in favor of any discussion, sorry, any discussion of that? We know what it's for. All those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Which takes us from the report and the recommendations to the bylaw itself, which is item 8.1b on our agenda, 289 to 294. It's now been amended, which is why after second reading, I'll simply hold, and it'll stay on the table until it comes back to us in third reading with all the amendments in place so we can actually see the final package. It's a little bit unusual, but I think we need the space between second and third readings. So looking for someone to move second reading of bylaw number 25, 274, 2016, CD 39, RTC Properties Limited, as amended more than once. Councillor Shanks moved, Councillor Mueller second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's carried.
Opposed?
Pardon? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, councillors, for your thoughtful consideration of a complex matter, and we can only do business at the council table, so I'm not sure how else we could do this other than simply rubber stamping everything that staff brings forward, which this council doesn't want to do. Especially Councillor Wright doesn't want to do. So we'll carry on. For adoption, item 8.2. Officers and employees bylaw, we have a report from the corporate officer. First, a motion to receive the report on page 295. Councillor Seegers, thank you. Councillor Shanks, seconding. All those in favor? That's carried. And it's the first evening we've had a 2-jug day. Corporate officer like to speak to this? It's fairly straightforward. It's coming in for adoption.
Readings at the last council meeting, and it's here for council's consideration of adoption now.
Thank you. I'll look for a councillor to move adoption of Officers and Employees Bylaw number 562-2017, a bylaw to establish officer positions of the District of Sechelt and to establish the powers, duties, and responsibilities of such officers. Councillor Lutz, Councillor Wright, all those in favor? That's carried. This is a very important document for those that are watching. It actually has the job descriptions and the roles and responsibilities of our core administrative officers. And as Councillor Mueller said at third reading, an important part of our organizational work. Moving on to new business, there is none. Moving on to item 10.1, which is Sea-Watch. We have a report from the Chief Administrative Officer dated November 10th, 2017. We have only a single recommendation that the report be received. Councillor Seegers, thank you. Councillor Lutz, second. And I look to the corporate officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Before council proceeds with considering the Chief Administrative Officer's report, I would just note and ask that council note that earlier today it was brought to my attention by the property owner of lot 25 that there is I guess we could call it a typo on page 311 of 10.1 under question 2, and then the second heading there that says April 5th, 2013 Thurber report.
Yes.
Fourth bullet down. And you'll see there it notes halfway down that paragraph, further conversation with Thurber showed that the recommended groundwater monitoring area includes lot 1, 2, and lot 25. That in fact is a typo and it should say lot 28. And then it appears again on the next page in the same paragraph, same bullet, and again that should read lot 28.
Okay. Thank you, and that will be amended in our records.
Thank you.
So lot 1, 2, and lot 28 in bullet 4 of the second bullet and at the end of that bullet as well. So twice in the same paragraph. Anything to cover from the author of the report? Fine. Councillors, anything you'd like to say in receipt? Councillor Wright.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to know, have we answered all of the questions that were asked of us?
Staff attempted to pull the questions from the multiple sources that came out of the September 20th meeting and tried to answer them sort of en masse, if you like. So every individual question was probably not answered, but the general answers we tried to give for all of those.
Any other questions or clarifications or comments from staff? Councillor Wright.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. Question 4, it says that further information will be provided. Do we have a timeline on that? When the community can expect to get the answer to that question?
That's on building permits and occupancy permits.
Yes.
Page 314 of the agenda package.
I'm not entirely sure. It'll take some backtracking work to pull that up.
Okay.
I've got to get building people to start going through those files.
Will the community have an answer to that question by January? I'm just trying to get a sense of, I'm not trying to pin it down to an actual day. I'm trying to pin it down to some sort of a...
Yeah, we're working on it now and as soon as possible. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Council receives a report. I know that staff has been working on it since the request on September 20th, and I thank them for their work and for that report. Moving on to item 10.2, we have a 10.2, a request for decision report from the Arts, Culture, and Communications Coordinator. First, a motion that the report on page 319 be received. Councillor Seegers, thank you. Councillor Lutz, seconding receipt. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Arts and Culture Coordinator. Ms. Smith would like to speak to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So before you is a report requesting that council rescind a resolution that directed staff to prepare a council policy regarding sponsorship of local groups seeking access to funding. The last time that we discussed this issue at council, a meeting of March 1st, we were addressing requests of 3 local groups seeking support for applying for funding from the Community Foundation. At that time, council noted that a policy was important for 2 reasons. One, that it would set out what our obligations would be, and 2, that it would ensure a process was in place so that community groups would know what they have to do when seeking assistance. As noted in this report, staff recommend that meeting those obligations and ensuring a process is in place can be accomplished without a new council policy. Our obligations are to adhere to the guidelines as they're specified by Canada Revenue Agency and to ensure that any projects we take on align with our own strategic plan. Both Canada Revenue Agency guidelines and our strategic plan can and will change over time, and we need to be able to be responsive to those changes without having to update and change policy every time a change is made. Process for the community to follow can be addressed in staff procedural documents and do not require a council policy unless there's specific criteria not already identified in our strategic plan or any guidelines provided by the CRA that council would like staff to adhere to.
Can you repeat the last part about administrative guidelines? Or staff guidelines? Staff procedural guidelines? Staff procedural
that the need for the community groups to have a process in place so that they know what to do can be addressed through staff procedures, as we would with any other program we might have in place where we are working with community groups, and we need to ensure that we're working with them in a fair way. And
But isn't the point here that we don't have a program, so there are no staff procedures or administrative guidelines, and we need at least a bare policy to provide guidance so that those staff procedures can be developed? And
do you want me to answer? Or is what you're saying that we're not able to create staff procedures without a council policy in place first?
I'm just curious. I thought that was the issue. We have groups coming forward. We have no staff guidelines or procedures. They have nothing to turn to, and neither do we. So, Councillor Seegers, I'll come back to that. Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. I understand where you're going with this, both Mayor Milne and Siobhan. We don't have policy at this point, and so we have people coming forward, and we're basically deciding ad hoc what we do in every situation. So what the proposal is that we look to CRA and their guidelines, and staff come forward with some kind of procedural policy to guide both staff and the community when they come forward with any kind of request of the District of Sechelt. So I guess my question would be, how soon do you anticipate coming forward with some kind of policy or procedural document that we could then put in place to provide that guidance?
And if they come forward, i.e. to us, as staff, they become a policy because we'll adopt them. So let's be, I think they were trying to avoid that. See, from our perspective, of course you're going to follow CRA guidelines. they're a senior government, those are laws. We're going to follow those guidelines. We're still left with, and community groups are left with, how can they approach us and how are we going to filter or not filter? And it could be as simple a policy as saying all requests for to become qualified, sponsored, or donors will follow CRA guidelines, staff procedures and regulations to follow. But to rescind it and leave us with a blank slate leaves us with what? Councillor Seegers.
In the CRA documents that are attached, there actually are a number of different ways that we can work with various community associations. So I think what staff is looking to identify is which of those would we actually adopt. Do we want to do joint ventures? Because there are rules around that, etc. So if a community association comes forward and can meet those guidelines, then we would be willing to work with them. But at this point, we don't know which one of them we're following.
Clearly we weren't clear enough when we sent it back for a staff report. I understand that because what comes is rescind it, have no policy, and just follow CRA guidelines. But we still thought it was useful for council to provide some guidance that maybe it's only those groups that fit our community investment program. Maybe it's only groups that are within the district of Sechelt. Maybe it's only groups that are good friends with council. Maybe it could be, the policy can be almost anything, but there has to be a filter. Otherwise, there's absolutely no way of guiding and suggesting council when they look at or the community when they come forward. So I'm not sure what was lost in the translation there. Any help from the CAO?
I'm not sure we're completely clear on what the issue is we're trying to address or deal with. What is, has there been a problem in the past that we're trying to avoid in the future?
Yes.
Because under the CRA options, it's still coming back to you to decide which one of those 3 or 4 options are you comfortable with on any given occurrence, right?
We want to know if we should even entertain any of these options. Okay. What kind of organizations, what kind of requests, what kind of charitable work? First, if it fits within the municipal mandates, which is almost everything for the good of Sechelt, and then some filtering for the kinds of organizations or individuals we may or may not. So if an individual comes forward with a great idea, would we in fact agree to be a flow-through agency and monitor and do that? We may say, no, that's too much work for staff. If it was an organization with a particular track record and a certain status and they're nonprofits, we might have a different review. If it's fitting within our community investment program, we might have a different view. So I just think there's a lot of potential for actually creating a one-page policy that gave some guidance to people. So, Councillor Seegers, your thoughts on this? This is where it came from.
Mm-hmm. Page 326, it lays out the common types of intermediaries. Agents, joint venture participant, cooperative participants, and contractors. And under each, we as the municipality would have various roles that we would have to fulfill. So I think what I would be looking for is for staff to come back and say, these are ones we would potentially work with other organizations under, and these we would not, because of the role that we as a municipality would need to take. So I'm, again, going to staff to come back and give us some guidance around these based on the requirements of staff and or council in fulfilling these roles. I do know that in the community, there, community services, for example, for many years has worked as a body where other people could use their charitable status to flow through funds to fulfill different needs in the community. And they have also withdrawn from that because of the liability and the requirements that are required under the CRA guidelines now. So I think we're looking again to staff to, look these over more and give us some more guidance.
And that's why more groups will be coming to us, because some groups aren't. I can also say I know the Arts Council has also, as a charitable organization, has had these relationships. They have a policy. The Sunshine Coast Arts Council can have a policy that actually guides their board. I would have thought that it wasn't too much of a reach to look for the district Sechelt to have some guidance as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think understanding that, staff can have a discussion about what our experiences have been and see if we can't put something together.
Thank you very much. So we'll simply leave that where it is, received and discussed, and we won't rescind our request at this point. And 10.3, proposed 2018 Council and Standing Committee schedule meeting. First, a motion to receive. Thank you very much. Councillor Seegers and Mueller. And somebody to move that the 2018 Council and Standing Committee meeting schedule be approved as presented. Thank you, Councillor Wright, Councillor Seegers. Any amendments to this? Any long breaks? You're happy with it all? One council meeting in August, 2 in December. Okay, all those in favor? Thank you, staff, for doing that. Such good work without an amendment. We have a schedule for 2018. Which moves us to 11. It's 9 o'clock. 11.1, councillor reports, and I'll start on my left, as I often do, though the councillor from the far left, Councillor Inkster, who's the director for the SCRD, is in Vancouver tonight with an SCRD project. But I'll start with Councillor Wright.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I had a number of meetings over the last couple of weeks with residents in Sechelt. About 8 to 10 residents in total. Issues are the homeless shelter, the airport, and water. Attended the Davis Bay Community Association as a liaison counselor, and the issue was water. Also attended the Advisory Planning Commission meeting, and also attended the Integrated Community Sustainability Committee meeting. I was only there for about 45 minutes of that particular meeting, and then I had to leave to go to something else. And then I attended the SCRD Planning and Development Committee meeting, as well as the SCRD board meeting. And then lastly, on your behalf, I was on the Coast Cable television show for top-tier local government, and guess what the issues were? Water. Took up about half the show. It was a delightful time, I might say. I quite enjoyed it. I took a lot of ribbing about wearing a tie, because nobody else wore a tie, but that's okay. We set the bar high in Sechelt. The other issue was, of course, homeless shelter. Okay, and then we had to give them an update on what had happened over the last 4 or 5 months in terms of basically the development that's happened in Sechelt and the status of some of those developments. And that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Seegers.
Thank you. November 2nd, I attended the Coast Community Builders Association Fall Mingler. The guest speaker was, we had two. Gary Little, he did a presentation with some of the maps of historic Gibsons. So it was quite interesting. And then Mayor Rowe actually got up and talked about the state of development in Gibsons. And two of the things that he mentioned are concerns, and will be concerns up and down the coast, are water. The other is solid waste. And one of the things that he mentioned at that meeting was that the regional district has come forward with 5 sites, I believe, where they are looking to potentially drill for additional water sources. 2 of them, he indicated, they believe would go right into the lines that feed the aquifer in Gibsons, and so they are opposed to 2 of those sites, and will be vigorously opposing the SCRD following up on those. I attended Med Talks. It's the first one I've attended, and it was below the belt, so men's health, and some of the men had to be dragged there to come to the session, but it was very well presented. The urologist has obviously done presentations on this a lot up and down the coast and throughout BC. He's actually presenting nationally and there was a lot of humor, so it was a good presentation. And then today, between the afternoon meeting and this one, I attended the Partners in Learning up at Chatelich, where they had 4 presentations by partners in their schools up and down the coast. So it was a very easy 2 weeks for me. So that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm glad you got up to the educational one at Chat. That's good. Councillor Mueller.
Yes, thank you. In terms of council work, I attended with the rest of council the RFCED meeting. Very much looking forward to getting to work on budget 2018 with the rest of council and staff. I also wanted to report to council, and I may have mentioned this to some of you, but in terms of right now, I'm educating myself a little bit on being a building official, so I'm going to be going for my building official level 1 exam. That, of course, feeds into my council work in other ways. It's the second piece of official, semi-official education that I've done since being here on council. When I first got in, of course, I did my corporate finance. So those 2 things really starting to serve me well here. It's a really good foundation. I encourage other councillors to go out and get that base. The building official thing being the base of what we do, so much of it. Also, along with the mayor and the deputy mayor, attended Remembrance Day. To me, that's always the focus at this time of year. That's such an important event. It's good to go out there and see who is there. See often former cadets like myself. I was a Seaforth Highlander here in Sechelt for a couple of years. But you know, every time that event comes around, I just can't help but think how good we have it right now in Canada. It's been so long since we've had any type of the call that was in, of course, the 2 world wars and the Korean War. And just to think where we would be as a society if we didn't have our international memberships in such organizations as NATO, which, of course, provides us our #1 deterrent through Article 8. And also the UN, our international partners that secure this type of a great peace that we've been living in. So that means a lot, of course, because the reality of the alternative is just too much to think about. So that's my report.
Thank you very much, and for remembering Remembrance Day. There were almost all of us were there, but they didn't all get back to the Legion. Councillor Lutz.
Thank you. I had a very light 2 weeks, but boy, was it ever busy. My only District of Sechelt event was meeting, the first one of our community investment program, to meet the new members of the committee. And that was a quick and well involved meeting. I also did attend, as part of the Community and Council, Remembrance Day. But last Wednesday, November 8th, my very first grandchild was born. So that's what's kept me busy. I can't quit. Thank you. She's Frankie Lee Lutz, 8 pounds, 1 ounce. And she's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for that report, and welcome to Frankie Lee.
It's going to be a boxer on
I think so. Councillor Shanks.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship. Well, my first meeting I attended was the Ferry Advisory Committee meeting with BC Ferries, and I'm glad to see a couple of people here that took me up on my offer of breakfast, paying for breakfast. I was so glad it was a continental breakfast they provided. But no, it was good. It was probably the best turnout I've actually seen down there, because I think there were about 12 or 15 people. And they gave the opportunity to see how those meetings run. A lot of information given out to us. Notably, the main issues seem to be one of those dealing with people that have medical issues and getting some degree of priority boarding. What came out of that was that BC Ferries is going to make contact with Coast Health and the province in terms of how you could possibly deal with it with the TAP forms which are issued to people. Another comment that was made, and I think I heard it for the first time, was that they are in fact proposing within 5 to 6 years 2 ferries on an hourly basis.
Wow.
So I don't think I misheard that, but that was good news. And very generously and kindly, the CAO Mr. Mark Collins has come around a great deal over the last 6 to 9 months in terms of his approach and public input. And he rose quite highly in my estimation when, in fact, he did pass comment about the considerable contribution that Jacob Knaus has made to the Ferry Advisory Committee and to the relationship between them and BC Ferries. His passing occurred, as many of you know, in the last few weeks. So it was very kind of him to recognize the efforts of Jacob Knaus even in his passing. Aside from that, I attended the SDBA meeting on Monday, and a lot of issues were brought up there. They indicated that at their Oktoberfest, due to the inclement weather, they did have a loss, but it was a good learning experience for them. And they have a lot of projects that are coming forward, one of which is the Festival of Lights and the organization of the parade. They're looking after that this year. I would also say that there was some kudos handed out to our CAO, Andrew Yates, in terms of his approach with the SDBA and at least one developer within the community. And the indication is we're on the right track with that relationship, being on a more cooperative basis with the District of Sechelt staff and the developers. And I indicated to the SDBA that I hope that would follow through in terms of our somewhat rocky relationship over the last few months with the SDBA and the District of Sechelt. So that's my report, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your work with the SDBA. Lots of things mentioned. I'll just, it was a busy couple of weeks for Sechelt Council, and thank you for those of you who stepped into things like the local government cable show or other events while I was preoccupied trying to balance a schedule that seemed to get busier than I had imagined. And I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Seeger's mentioning the below the belt med talks. If you're a man in the room and you're over the age of 40, get yourself tested. It's important, and it's important to do on a regular basis. It'll save your life, and it'll save probably the lives of the people you live with in terms of the quality of their life as well. I had prostate cancer in 2008, and glad to say that I have a lot of faith in Western medicine to make sure that it's just small blip on the way through your life. It's not a major factor. Don't get worried about it. Just get yourself tested, because your choice is either being looked after or dying. So it's a pretty simple choice. And if you're over 40, start taking that seriously. Moving on, 11.2, the SCRD board. The director, Sechelt Director Inkster, is away. He's attending Recycle BC workshops in Vancouver. As some of you know, I was appointed to the SCRD board by this council for November 1st. Last Thursday, I attended my first day at the board and the first board meeting, and in the afternoon, I was nominated and elected to be chair of that board for the next year. It was an honor to be recognized by the board, and the only one who isn't happy is Irene at home, who said, "You might be the chair at the board, but you're a footstool at home." Just remember that. No, it's the balance of public life and private life is important for all of us, but the opportunity to serve in the capacity we have and is what most of us are here for. And I'm hoping that I can work well in that position to help the SCRD board make the best decisions we can for our community. And it's a good, strong board, and it's just a matter of having. There's 9 people on that board that can all probably do the job and do the job well, but they made a choice in terms of the particular skills I have for tweaking things a little bit as we move forward. So I'm looking forward to that, and I hope that they are as well. Moving on to item 12, we have council correspondence, motion to receive, Councillor Seegers and Councillor Lutz. All those in favor? And we did have one request. Item 2 has a request for us to recognize December 11th as A Day for Our Common Future, being the 30th anniversary of the Brundtland Report. Just call that to attention if councils or any councillors are interested in making that motion. And I think the rest is all pretty straightforward. The one thing I did notice was item 4, the response from the Director of Operations, I think was actually a response from the Communications Manager. Councillor Seegers on correspondence.
Yes, number 6.
Number 6. Oh, yes.
Sechelt Chamber of Commerce regarding wooden signage maintenance. I'd like to request that staff follow up on this.
Second that motion by Councillor Lutz. Thank you. All those in favor? We want to make sure that sometimes staff aren't sure if we're just sort of suggesting things or directing. It is important to put the resolution in. Anything else from the correspondence people would like to address? Moving on then to item 12.2, which is the RCMP monthly stats for October 2017. A motion to receive. Thank you, Councillors Seegers and Mueller. All those in favor? Any items you'd like to draw to our attention from that? Do you think they've got a typo in terms of the month they're looking at it? May 26, May 2017? Are they just filing old reports because they're too busy to give us the current ones? I recognize the RCMP is very busy, but let's ask them to check the total calls months. I'm sure our staff didn't, because we'd only have one at a time that came. They'd have a whole folder of them to pull from. Sechelt Visitor Center stats for October 2017, item 12.3, a motion to receive. Councillor Seegers, Councillor Wright, all those in favor. Anything to draw our attention to on that? Nights in the community dropped significantly. And I think that's just the winter weather and who's going to the visitor center in November compared to in the summer. There being no emergency items, I'd look for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Lutz and Councillor Mueller, all those in favor. Thank you for your patience, those of you who have been and watched this evening's session. It was a long session, and as you could tell when we were dealing with RTC, it was complicated.